Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Economics Happy Hour podcast. My name is Matt Rosu.
And I'm Jadrian Wooten.
Excited to have you here today. We think we've got some good stuff lined up. This will drop in mid-February, as those who are downloading it know. It's the last day of January, so I am still dry unless at 7, I figure maybe I can go on London time, but not until 7 at a minimum. So I'm doing yet another Virgin Moscow Mule tonight. What do you have tonight, Jadrian?
We really should have, I feel like in hindsight, it was fine to do it today, but I feel like we really should have planned to do this tomorrow, so it could have been your first drink. So I was a little late to this recording, so I'll publicly apologize to Matt as part of my running late. Part of why I ran late was my fault because I was trying to leave campus. The other part of why I was late was I was furiously digging through my mini fridge, checking the back of each one. I picked up a 6-pack at Kroger, a pick your own 6. I'd pull one out and I go, oh no, this is from Charlotte. And I pull out the second one and I go, oh, this is from Cincinnati. And so I was trying to find you a Virginia one. So I had to dig deep in the back of the fridge. I have the Whiter Shade from Star Hill Brewery, a white IPA.
Okay.
Star Hill was the one I had, I don't know how many episodes ago, but it was the Chloe. It was a cranberry orange sour and I really liked it. So we're going to go with a white IPA. I don't think I've ever had a white IPA.
I have. They can be quite delicious. So.
I also have some good news that I'll share. I'll say semi-good news, given we have converted at least one listener to Untapped. One of our favorite economists, Brian O'Rourke, is now Brian, on Untapped. Awesome. He told me. He said he's earned lots of badges because he's getting all those when you first sign up badges.
You've got your first beer. Yeah.
So Brian, thank you for listening. We love your comments.
And a shout out to Brian he's kind of helped on the topic he gave a recommendation for today's topic. So
this is Brian O'Rourke Day.
Brian O'Rourke today, economist at Robert Morris University, for those who don't know, and
the
co-author
of a really cool book.
Yeah, all sorts of cool book. Co-author on the Essentials of Economics with Dirk Mateer and Lee Kopic, and he's written some superhero econ books. I know he's done Harry Potter economic stuff. I don't know if he's written a Harry Potter econ book.
I don't think so.
But
he's also the editor of the Journal of Economics Teaching.
Yep.
He's a jack of all trades, and he is actually a master of a lot of things too. So he's very good at what he does.
And he clearly doesn't sleep with all the stuff he does. So.
And he's probably going to be very embarrassed that we're saying all these really nice things about him publicly.
That's part of the fun. So.
Yeah, go buy Brian's book. So we'll make it a book pitch. Brian did not tell us to do this, but Brian has 2 superhero economics books that are really interesting. So go buy Brian's book. He helped us with today's topic.
It's by the time people see this, it will be over. But later this week, I go to Florida for Cheers, virtual Cheers. But I go to Florida later this week and present with Brian to some high school teachers, which I'm very excited about. So we each had an hour, and we said let's combine to 2, and we'll just go back and forth. So a little bit. That should be fun.
What pop culture thing did I see you present recently? I went to your session. Where did you, Appy? No, you didn't go to Appy.
Was it the Game of Thrones? I was at Appy.
I think so. Oh, okay. Then I sat at your Game of Thrones Appy session. Okay.
Yeah, yep. No, that was good. Interesting. So in econ, it's always this interesting, if you're doing something, you don't want to do something somebody else has done. Mm-hmm. And so we're like, hey, let's think about economics of Game of Thrones. And I did a pretty big search, and I couldn't find anybody who had really done much on it. I'd seen there was a game theory presentation on it before, but not really general economics. And so thinking, yeah, let's buy the domain name and start to do clips and present it at Appy. And then I heard from somebody, it was Aaron Yetter, I believe it was Aaron, who told me he was another just superstar economist, especially on teaching methods. Saying, yeah, I just heard from Linda Gent, and she's doing this, the same thing. And so I reached out right away, and they were thinking of doing a game theory site, and we actually collaborated with them. Mm-hmm. So it's the moral of the story, I guess, it's good to present your work early. You never know where you can find good collaborations, but we've been working. The site is actually live. It's still incomplete and rough, so don't judge us on it yet, but you can find a bunch of clips on it. And got a student who's doing a great work, puts in, his main job is being a student, but puts in some hours per week. What?
Is this Bailey?
No, Bailey's actually graduated. Okay. And He's killing it in the quote unquote real world now. No, it's actually a first year student who's just a website guy. I am bringing 2 students to Appy though, which will be awesome. And no, so it's good stuff. So any Econ Thrones, if you want a sneak peek of what we're working on, but it's not quite final yet, so you have to put up with some of the.
So speaking of moving fast and being the first one to do things, I don't know if I actually ever told you this. I think I might have emailed you about it. I was very mad at you because I had, oh, did I? About you scooping me on something. Not only did you scoop it, but like you had it published before I ever wrote it. I had this great idea of like, hey, let's take music and link it to agricultural economics. Like my PhD was at an ag econ school. And so I like even like partnered up with somebody who I went to school with. She does ag econ stuff. And I was like, this is going to be great. Nobody's doing this. And then like a month and a half later, I get a notification from Google that says, Matt has published a paper on teaching ag econ policy with music.
So I had talked about that with people like 5 or 6 years ago, and like it got stalled, and then I finally found somebody who wanted to do it. The funny thing is if I had mentioned I'd wanted to do it, you probably would have said, yeah, let's do that together.
I had a playlist ready. Like I had songs. Some of the songs are not ones that you picked, but I was like, well, I can't publish it now. Like,
no, that's there was that, and then I remember you saying like you really moved to get some Squid Game stuff out right away. I remember you also saying that.
We published that. I have never worked on a project faster than the economics of Squid Game. If I remember correctly, the timing of everything, I think the TV show came out like November 2021, and we had a working paper online like January 2022, like within months. We had put something online because we're like, this is going to be huge. And I've never worked that fast, and I don't like working that fast.
No, but it was good work. It was interesting, and
yeah, it's been really popular so far. We're excited for season 2. The hardest part is just getting people to use it because it's just so bloody. So all the clips, it's the same Game of Thrones problem. But you have at least some more dialogue.
There's a lot of dialogue, and we have censored ourselves on stuff. Even though like the site is adult and kids can access anything. Yeah. There was a great scene in a brothel with about like monopolistic competition, and our brothel offers slightly different things than the other brothels. But like, there's naked women everywhere, and I'm like, we're not gonna have that on our site. I mean, it's a great clip, but they'll have to be content with the other 70 great clips. That's just one we're not going to put on there.
We had to get real creative. Like I've never had to like sit down and like watch a show and try to creatively clip out people being beheaded, falling off of rock. I'm like, there's just like so many cuts between all of this. But they're fun projects. I've started to move away a little bit from pop culture econ, and I say that as I'm in the middle of writing 2 pedagogy papers with other people, but I'm trying to do a little bit more empirical stuff just to give myself like a mental break. Like I've been doing too much teaching econ and not enough like researching econ. So
that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Our topic today, like the main topic we wanted to cover, once again mentioned. Thanks to Brian for planting the seed for us to do this, was to discuss the economics of population growth, or really to be more accurate, what are the economic implications with a population decline? It's certainly not a topic that I have been addressing in my classes. I don't know that there's that much out there. So, I mean, I think the first thing, at least for me, I cannot claim to be a genius on this topic. So it's about as humble as I'll be as I'm trying to make my cases on things.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to flash back to everything I've learned about economics. I'm fairly confident. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong if you learned something different. I feel like we always learn about growth from population growth. I don't really remember ever like learning about theories or models related to economic or population decline. I present it as an option in my principles class. I say, an increase in population increases demand. And I always say like, you could have a decrease in population, but I always kind of blow it off as like, that'll never happen. Like but it does. It happens a lot of places, not just like globally, like it's local.
Yeah.
And even, I think the worst part is I talk about it in the sense of like college campuses. College campuses see a massive increase in population, then a massive decrease, then an increase, and then a decrease. But for whatever reason, I feel like I never learned about models or research around population decline.
The one thing in researching this topic a bit that I think I'm most confident on is those who are super confident on their particular takes, I'm going to discount them.
Okay.
Because I think this is a case where, and maybe it's because I'm got the audiobook for Thomas Sowell's Knowledge and Decisions, which, you know, the central argument, right, that people who knowledge is so dispersed within the economy that it's any one person can't possibly figure it out. It's the individual knowledge that different people at a lower level have. I think there's some big things I think we'll be able to parse out here, but I also think those who are super confident and arrogant are really setting themselves up for foolishness. And I think there have been cases of that actually on the opposite side that I'm going to point out in a moment.
Well, so I wonder how much of it is confidence that makes you feel that you need to discount them versus their actual statements, right? So there's times where, so I think about like the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like the really confident people. I have a research paper with Ben Smith on this, where like if you want attention, you just be really confident. You don't have to be accurate. The louder you shout, and if you're wrong, like nobody remembers it in a decade. But like if you're right and you're shouting about it, nobody cares about it. So like how much of it do you think for you personally do you think it's their confidence, or do you think it's actually like their underlying results that you're discounting?
Well, I don't know of many people who are talking about population growth with such certainty that I can, or population decline with certainty. But with population growth, there's just a specific example of the name's Paul Ehrlich, and it's not.
Love this story.
Yeah, it's not the confidence, right? He said basically in the late 60s, early 70s, how the world was going to be completely destroyed from population growth, and engaged in an actual wager with another scientist. I believe it was on commodity prices. He says, "What's an objective thing?"
They got to pick. So I remember this debate because I talked about it in natural resources.
Yeah.
It is on. They got to pick certain commodities, and I believe the person he debated, or so Ehrlicher, or
Paul Ehrlich is the name of the person who was the doomsday.
I think the person who made the bet let him pick the price of 10 different things. I think this was the setup.
Yep. That sounds correct. There's a fantastic book called The Bet. We can put that. We'll put that in the show notes. That I've read. It's been many years, so I can't recall the name of the other person. And Ehrlich lost the bet pretty dramatically. Now I have heard people say, "Hey, if you'd taken a different time horizon, he could have won the bet." But the bet was like an objective proxy for him saying population growth is going to destroy the whole world.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of that, he's failed so miserably. And what just like, I cannot fathom, you speaking with confidence. This guy was on 60 Minutes like 2 weeks ago. I mean, I have not.
So it's Julian Simon. It's Simon and Ehrlich, the Simon Ehrlich wager of the 1980s. So it was non-government control of raw materials was what he got to pick. So the bet that he picked it on, I found it while you were talking. No, but you're right. Like they're still going, right? It's one of those, like, exactly as you said, like if you picked 10 different ones, he would have won. If you do it for a longer time period, he might have won. Like,
that's true, but the general premise of Ehrlich has just failed so miserably that I don't buy much into. Well, he would have won, so his things were right. Well, he was saying the world was going to be destroyed. He was wrong.
It was 5 commodities. I was wrong. It was 5, not 10.
5, not 10.
He chose copper, chromium, nickel, tin, and tungsten. In case you're curious, if you like chemistry, those were the 5 elements he picked.
Yeah, and so. And I guess he spoke with confidence then, and he's still speaking with confidence now. And I guess that does go to your point. You speak with confidence and people will listen. And, well, many people will forget. This was it was so surprising because, certainly there are many comments. I'm sure I've made very incorrect comments 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 days ago. But many of them are forgotten. This one was so public. There was quite a few people on Twitter.
I think they were on they were on the Tonight Show. I don't know who it was. I don't remember who it was back then.
Simon
Johnny Carson?
Johnny Carson would have been 80s, certainly.
The Late Show? Yeah, so this was his original bet was in the 80s. But like they were appearing on like national television to talk about these things. Like right there, like they were massive big bets. And it's the confidence that really got him attention.
Yeah.
I think that's the only, they had like follow-up bets, but a lot of the follow-up bets were about like climate change. He was basically saying like, okay, it's not population. The climate will ruin all these other things too. And I don't know, like there are parts of the world that are still growing very quickly. And so like while we might see population decline in like Japan, I know the United States is getting close, right? Like whatever the replacement, like we're real close to the replacement rate, I think is what I always hear. Like what implications that has on things. So I guess like we can recircle back to the implications.
Yeah. So what are some of the potential downsides? What are a couple that you think of? I've got a couple in mind, but.
So the easiest link is gross domestic product. So GDP is the amount of stuff that a country is producing or a region is producing. And realistically, if you have fewer people, you might not be able to make as much stuff. But at the same time, you might not need to make as much stuff because you have fewer people.
Why would we care this? So if you're making a 75 grand a year,
yep.
Does it matter if you're making 75 grand a year and 100 people are also making exactly 75 or 1,000 are making 75? I think it's the per person that matters a bit more.
And so that's why people mostly go to the per person level. But one of the problems I think that we're seeing, we maybe haven't seen it yet, but we're seeing, right? We're living longer. And so what you're getting is more people who are not part of the labor force who need care and attention, but we don't have that like push from the bottom side to help with things like, right? The argument's always like, we don't have enough people paying taxes to help with Social Security.
Sure.
That's an argument that's happened. We've been talking about that for a while. I think just from like a GDP standpoint, we don't necessarily have enough people at the bottom end to produce things and take care of people who are at the older age. I don't know a nice way to say this, but
no, we don't have. I mean,
we don't have enough people to take care of people.
I think that was one that I had. It's tougher to fund entitlements was the way I phrased it. But when I was thinking, it's if the population is declining, almost at the same time, longevity is increasing, which outside of COVID, it's still generally been increasing, albeit very slightly in the U.S. It'll be tougher to fund entitlements because we'll have more older people versus younger people and more retired versus non-retired. I think that's that's a pretty key problem to have to solve.
So you have that in terms of a funding section, but also just as like the care economy. We already struggle to have nurses and healthcare providers as it is. And right, if you have fewer people coming in to be those spots and we just have people getting older, we don't even have people to take care of a growing, aging population. That's where I link it back to GDP in the sense of not necessarily like producing stuff that we're consuming, but like these services that we're going to need to have, especially if you think like long-term where realistically should be, I would imagine we would just keep living longer, right? That we have more scientific breakthroughs. I can't imagine, unless it's a pandemic, right, where we have these dips. I would just expect we just keep getting older and older on average.
Yeah. No, I think, and I think that is a key issue. That's the one negative consequence of population decline. I'm sure there's a term for this. I don't know, but there's a tiny percentage. Let's say it's 1 in 100 million. People who are just these super geniuses who come up with innovations and ideas that really advance economic growth. And if we say it's 1 in 100 million, let's just say it's that number. I mean, you can say it's 1 in a million or whatever number you want. The fewer, if population shrinks, if it's 1 in 100 million, okay, I guess if you're at 8 billion, that's 80.
Yeah.
Throughout the population, But if that shrinks, that is fewer people to potentially drive these major innovations. And if there's a bit of variance in exactly when these individuals are born, there's perhaps a probability that you'll go a longer stretch without finding.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I hadn't
people who drive innovation.
I never thought of that. That's really interesting.
Oh, I mean, once again, I put the cautionary note that somebody might be listening and have some way. Yeah. But you're forgetting about this one point, and then leave a comment, because I think we're loving on this.
I can kind of link that away from just the idea that there might be one, right, like one super entrepreneur, right? We might lose one or two. But one of the benefits of growth and kind of agglomeration in general is you get these spillover benefits. Right, like we cluster people in cities and spaces, and like that helps kind of drive what's happening there. And realistically, if you have fewer people, and assuming that they're kind of in the same proportion, right, like Los Angeles is getting smaller about the same level New York is getting smaller, you're missing some of those spillover benefits that cities have. Some of it could be like what part of the population is declining. If I had to guess on data, I would imagine that populations are, I know for a fact that California is seeing, right, massive amounts of people leaving.
Well, they're just leaving. Yeah.
They're leaving, right? Like that's a decline of population in California. And so like, I would imagine that cities probably are likely to see bigger reductions from smaller families. I don't know. That's a very broad generalization. But I would imagine that cities would see it first as a percentage change. So you might lose some spillover benefits from just fewer people in an area, not as much kind of activity happening.
Yeah, that's a good point, and one that I hadn't thought about the spillovers on that side. Yeah. So
well, right, it's kind of connected with the the idea of economics of innovation. Is you have enough people in an area, one of them might be a super successful entrepreneur, and then the other ones who start businesses will create jobs for other people, and you might have a little bit less of that.
Correct. No, that makes sense. Any other huge problems? And I mean, honestly, I went to, I in my searching, I wasn't overly impressed by what a lot of people had said, including, the very basics of like going to Wikipedia and like, what is the Wikipedia entry on this? A lot of it had to do with what you were saying, like GDP per capita, is it population decline? How does it relate to GDP per capita versus GDP increasing or decreasing? Well, to me, that's almost a separate issue, right? I mean, of course they could be related, but if we have economic growth per capita, that's fantastic. If we don't, that's problematic.
I'm really hoping we have somebody who like specializes in this area who just happens to be listening. But I'm curious, just like, I'm thinking about this like on the spot. So again, that's going to be my caution is I'm coming up with this on the spot. Our economy has gotten very strong given economies of scale. Generally, we do a pretty good job of producing stuff, shipping it out places. And I'm curious, like, if you think about if this is a concern where we're not producing as much stuff, so we're not as efficient as we could be, right? So like, let's say like we lose half the country, right? Like half the country's gone. Our infrastructure is set up for economies of scale, that we're producing corn in Nebraska, but like now you have fewer people. And so I wonder if the GDP per capita wouldn't, so the assumption is, right, GDP would decline, but population would decline. So GDP per capita might stay the same. But I wonder if it would. Like, I wonder if like the drop in GDP would be so much larger, mostly because we rely so heavily on just-in-time manufacturing, or kind of these economies of this efficiency idea of where things are produced. I wonder if like the spillover benefits decline enough that we don't produce as much stuff and we actually see a GDP per capita drop.
With that big of a drop, yes. I mean,
it might not be huge. Thankfully, right? I think maybe 75 to 70, right? Like, but it's meaningful enough that.
Yeah, thankfully, I think it's going to be. I think it's much more gradual.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
Oh yeah.
But the no, I mean, I think if you have infrastructure for 340 million, and if we were suddenly down to 200 million. It makes sense that not only would GDP drop, but GDP per capita could drop if we lose some efficiencies.
Well, I think about it like efficiency in the sense of like, right, take Selinsgrove, for example. Like, what if, right, over a long period of time, like one grocery store closes, right? Like maybe we're at the max, but one of them closes and you get to keep all the rest of them. in a marginal sense, like it's not that big of a deal, right? But like everyone who picked the closest grocery store now has to go to a slightly further away grocery store.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Right. I think about like even like you lost, or you could think about like you probably go to the closest grocery store in your hometown. Do you go somewhere else?
I do. Yeah.
You go the closest one, right?
It does help that it's Wise Markets, and we are the Sigmund Wise School of Business, named after the founder. But
so how much? Okay, so the Weiss is your closest one. Okay, actually, so maybe I should ask this as like a weird side note. This is a Pennsylvania thing. So Pennsylvania people, you might not get this. Is it Weiss or is it Wise?
I think it's Wise, just because that's the way they say it in the grocery store.
Okay, I've always wondered that.
Yeah, I could sing the jingle, but nobody needs to hear me sing. So that might be a bonus episode if we ever do like a
we need clips, right? Actually, that's what we need. I think we need the outtakes, the cuts that don't happen.
Yep.
So how far away is the next grocery store? 2 minutes? 4 minutes?
If there's no traffic, the next closest would likely be the Giant, which is on 1115 for the listeners near Selinsgrove, which will be like, there's a few students who've listened. Thank you to those who have. That would probably be I bet it's a 10-minute drive. It goes from about 3 to 10, 12.
Yeah, right. So like, but I think this is always that story when they talk about efficiency. I always think about when you're going through airport security and people are like, oh, taking off your shoes is not that big of a deal. But when you think about like 10 seconds for every person who flies every single day, like then it adds up. So I think about that where like, right, it's just 5 more minutes if one grocery store closed, but like collectively that could be really huge. And like, that might be like the extent of population decline as you get slightly fewer businesses, but now everything's further away.
I think you're right. And that would be a pain. I think that would at least be partially offset if the population declines that much, there'd be fewer people on the road. So it'd be a little bit more efficient to get to and from places. But
yeah. So I don't know. Or you'd have higher costs, but maybe people are paid more. You would expect people to be paid more because there's fewer workers, but you'd also expect higher costs, not just because of people being paid more, but you'd lose a little bit of the economies of scale.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, actually, I don't have a good answer. Like, again, listeners, I've come up with this right on the spot. I'm kind of curious if population declined, like in that sense where we lose just a few businesses, like would that have a bigger impact than we really realize? But then, like you said, right, this is a centuries problem. We'll probably never know the actual outcome.
I imagine it'll be so marginal, but I mean, certainly small towns have faced this. I mean, there are towns that have lost their stores, and clearly can't be fun to go to the next town over. I mean, you want to start a riot in a small town, tell them they might have to close the post office. That politically, right? That's not what a politician's in business to do. That's what
I have driven away from Selinsgrove towards Harrisburg. I don't remember why I was doing it. I left Selinsgrove and I went south instead. And I remember driving through some of those towns thinking, oh, wow, how do people live here? Like I was driving through and I was like, there's a McDonald's and a Subway. And like, but you'd see houses along the road, you'd see like a local auto parts place. And I'm like, but man, your only food choices are this Subway and this McDonald's. And I'm like, you got to drive. I feel annoyed when there's traffic on my 5-minute commute to Kroger. I couldn't imagine like a 30-minute commute to pick up groceries weekly. I will say, so I will admit for everybody listening, I am incredibly spoiled. And I will say I have no qualms saying I'm very privileged in the sense that I have never had a real commute. Everywhere I've lived, I would rather have a more expensive house and a 5-minute commute than to live 30 minutes away.
Yeah.
We have faculty and staff down in Blacksburg. We have faculty and staff who live in Roanoke, which is a bigger city, but it's like 30, 40 minutes away. And in my mind, I look at that and I go, man, that's like an hour to an hour and a half every single day that you just spend in your car. And I go, like the things, I think about opportunity costs, the things that I could do with an extra hour and a half every single day
of your life,
of my life. Like I love podcasts, I'll listen to music, but I
I mean, like we wouldn't be doing this, right?
Right,
If we lost an hour a day for 5 days a week, we can't do this show.
So maybe the people who are commuting are big supporters. They're the ones listening.
We're telling you how miserable your life choices are.
I'm glad other people do it. I really need to be like close. Like every house I think I've looked at, I'm like, how far does it take me to get to work?
Yep.
Do I drive by a coffee place so I can get like a McDonald's coffee, Starbucks? I don't care what it is. Do I drive by coffee? And is it like kind of a direct shot there? It's tough.
So any benefits? Anything on your list of benefits if this happens? I have one or two. I mean,
well, so I think you mentioned one, right? Like the congestion side of. Yep. I wouldn't even say cities. I mean, there's very few places. I think it's all relative, right? Like congestion. Congestion in a city is obviously very different than a congestion in a small town, but like they still have congestion. It's still annoying. So I would imagine like I would like that. Slightly fewer, less competition for things. If I had to, actually, this has always been kind of an annoyance. This is actually going to go back to my comment about like, what if you have one less business that exists? I think a potential benefit, and this is going to be very strange, but I think I could imagine a world where you get more efficient businesses rather than less efficient businesses. So this is going to be, I think, a very big stretch. Okay, so take this under consideration. I've always been surprised at the number of gas stations that exist. I think in my mind, there's too many gas stations, mostly because like I very rarely see every pump full. There's generally always excess capacity, and I'm like, why do we have 5? We could survive with 4. And so I'm curious. I could imagine a situation where if we have a slightly smaller population, that we might have. This is like the exact opposite of economic theory, because normally economic theory is like the more business, you're only going to get the better competition happening. But I could imagine a situation where things could get better in a very small sense, in the sense of like, we don't need 5, we only have 4 gas stations. And so now there's like it's not more competition, but like, man, maybe I'm not explaining this in a very good way.
But the 4 that survive are the stronger 4.
The 4 that survive are probably stronger, right? Like you go from 20% of the market to 25% of the market. So you want to try to keep a little bit more. Yeah. I mean, some of our best companies are companies that have a large market share. They're generally not what we would consider like textbook competitive market, zero profit companies. Like, right, we look at the things Amazon does and we're like, oh, they do so many cool things. We get 3-day shipping or 2-day shipping and stuff. Or even like, I think like Target, right? Target and Walmart. Yep. They generally do like I don't love Walmart, but man, they are incredible. They're incredibly efficient. I don't shop there, but like Target and Walmart are really cool. But when I think about like my neighborhood gas station, their profits are way smaller. And I very rarely walk into a gas station where I'm like, this is impressive. They're doing a good job. So I wonder if some like consolidation might actually make things better rather than
interesting. Worse. I would think the offset of competition would negate that, but I mean I see the point, right? If you're dealing with fewer on the efficiencies, but I think, I mean, you touched on something as well. I mean, it somewhat deals with the congestion issue. I mean, there's a set amount of natural resources in the world, right? And if you have a smaller population, in theory, right, it's either more natural resources per person, or if each person uses the same amount of natural resources, it's overall reducing the amount of natural resources that are used. So it's either more per capita, reducing the amount that's used overall, or potentially some combination of both. That seems like a positive.
That's a really good one.
I think we talked about older. There's going to be pressure on the elderly. Mm-hmm. Well, if population is shrinking, then there's fewer younger people. The entitlement, so to speak, is school funding. Mm-hmm. So in theory, we could save on that. Although if it's sudden, man, there's some nasty inefficiencies if it's sudden, right? I mean, like, let's say you mentioned dropping 200 million. Right. Let's say we dropped in half. I mean, what do we do with all of the teachers right now, right? I mean, that's ugly. But if it's gradual and slow over time, so.
I hadn't even thought about that, of just, right, like there's so much funding that does go towards, right, like I think of Medicaid, right? Like
Yeah.
I always get these confused on which one's for old. and which one's for young.
Medicare is for seniors. Medicaid is for, I think, impoverished. I'm not 100%, but
yeah, but I think a lot of it is like, I think a lot of Medicaid is geared towards children or birth. It is low, it's income based, but it's generally connected with the children. I hadn't even thought about that. That's actually super interesting, that you would have those savings in that space, or right, even if you're not changing. Actually, this could be really interesting, right? Like even if you're not changing your education spending, if you kept it the same, you're essentially devoting more money per pupil, and you might actually get more productive workers, and you could actually see more GDP, right? Like each child is now getting slightly more attention, more training, more funding. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Brian, this is amazing. This is an amazing topic.
Call back to Brian.
Brian O'Rourke picked an amazing topic because I think he has stumped both of us now on whether we want this to be, whether we want bigger or smaller.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know this well enough to say what's better. The third thing that I think, I don't know if it's good or bad, but I think is an interesting interaction.
Okay.
Is if you have the population decline, how much does artificial intelligence help to offset the need for the loss of workers? I think that's kind of fascinating.
So Bill Gates has a famous thing. Have you heard his pitch on this? I taught this in my labor class. I kind of brought up this idea of like, look, people aren't taking care of the elderly. What should we do? Automation. And he is an incredible, he's a big proponent of, he calls it a robot tax. But essentially arguing that we, as an economy, we tax businesses on their profits, but we also tax them on how they're hiring workers. Right, like they pay half of the income tax and Social Security tax, things like that. But then he made the argument that essentially, if you have a company that replaces a worker with a robot, like you're losing part of that tax revenue. That's going to fund Social Security, right? Like they pay half the Social Security, they pay half of the Medicare tax. It's possible that like you see a bigger increase in the profits, but you might not. They might change pay or something like that. And he basically argued that we need to move away from funding a large portion of our healthcare for senior citizens to stop basing it on labor, because we're seeing a decrease in labor. And that we should start thinking about maybe a value-added tax or a capital tax or some sort of production tax, because automation is producing things. And so what matters is that you're taxing production or you're taxing the way it's produced. And we currently tax the way it's produced rather than the actual production.
That's a fascinating point. Yeah.
It's super interesting to think about. But like that would be in that kind of same scenario where, and that was one of the arguments, was basically you take that tax revenue from robots and you can either invest in paying people better wages to take care of senior citizens, or investing in some sort of automation, artificial intelligence to help take care of senior citizens.
That's an interesting point. And again, I don't know the interaction, but it would play out. So I think a big thanks to Brian on that.
Yeah, Brian, you picked a very good topic. So please share this so that we can brag about you to your friends.
Yeah, ahead of time, I mentioned I didn't tell Jadrian what it was, but I mentioned how I had a great pop culture one, and you weren't sure yet. I don't know. I can go first if you are not sure yet on what you'd like to share for a pop culture.
I'm trying to think if I have any sort of. Yes, I have a pop culture thing. I do. Okay. I do. Let me go first because I'm not convinced that mine is that good.
If you take mine, then I'm going to be crushed.
How wild would it be if I actually do pick the right one? There was a movie that came out a couple, I don't remember how long ago, but I have a clip about it on my website. And I don't remember the people, so I'm going to try to like kind of furiously find it, but you could shrink yourself. And so like you could volunteer to shrink yourself to like take care of, it was more focused on like climate change. It's called Downsizing. Is the name of the movie. This isn't your thing, right?
This was not mine.
Okay.
This is not mine. Yeah.
So it's starring Matt Damon. It was a 2017 science fiction comedy. The idea, if I can find it really fast, searching for a way to address overpopulation and global warming. Norwegian scientists, somebody develop, I can't pronounce it, so that's why I said somebody, sorry, develops downsizing, an irreversible process that shrinks you into a very tiny person, but you still get to like live with other little tiny people, but like you don't take up as much space. And so it was more of like it had a little bit of overpopulation, but it was really focused on global warming. So it's kind of like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but the idea is like everybody got to, like, you could decide if you wanted to do it and stuff like that. And they would pay you to like live in a condo, but you're like this big. So that's my pop culture one. It is about overpopulation.
Fascinating. So mine, there's a current show. So that episode 3 just dropped when we're recording this. It will probably be episode 6 or 7 is out now, but the season 1 is not over, and they haven't announced it yet, but they're going to do a season 2. HBO has a fantastic new show called The Last of Us, which is based on a video game of the same name. And maybe I'm biased because I played the video game and loved the video game. I think it's really one of the best video games of all time. But look,
that's bold. We should have a conversation about that.
Yeah, there are plenty of TV shows and movies made on video games, and they're almost all universally terrible. This is unbelievable how good it is. But I don't know how much our listeners know of The Last of Us. It follows Joel is essentially a smuggler who's smuggling Ellie in a world where a fungus, basically a virus, a fungus, infected the population, turned them into zombies or monsters. And it was pretty easy to transmit. It can be transmitted by biting. There's some places where it might be able to be transmitted through the air. And you've got this population that got overrun by this virus. And so The Last of Us is the last remaining, the small, very small population subset. And it kind of fits in perfect with our discussion. But the timing on this, I actually watched the episode that dropped Sunday yesterday from when we're talking, and instantly said, okay, I've tried to record from HBO Max, but there is something. Yesterday's episode was so good with economics content. I'm like, I've got to figure this out. And I spent some time figuring out how to change the settings in Firefox so that I could record. And they say, look, don't do anything illegal, and I'm going to distribute it in terms of fair use, right? Because I'm making educational point. But I'll have a video that's dropping probably tomorrow when I'm speaking, but it will be out by the time you see this, and we'll link it in there. There's incredible gains from trade on there, because there is this survivalist prepper kind of guy who the community comes through, and they're all freaking out, right? If you get bitten or you get infected and you're going to kill people, and they come through and round everybody up from this town. This guy hides in his little bunker, and they don't catch him, and nobody's in the town anymore. And so he had prepared for this. He gathers all the stuff. He's got a self-sustaining thing going on. He's got all the gas he needs from the plant. He's got generators. He's got gardens. He's got more guns than you could imagine. He's got everything he needs to be self-sufficient. He eventually gets a partner who stumbles in, and they become involved, and they become they get married actually at the end, but a partner, but doesn't want to deal with anybody else. But then Joel, the main character, came in, and they show this sequences, and he's like, look, you've got a nice place. It's a nice place here. He goes, you're great. We have everything we need. I don't know why you're here. We're self-sufficient. He goes, looks over at the fence. He goes, that aluminum's going to be done within a year. I could get you 10 spoles. I have medicine. I have seeds. And then they show later, they trade a gun to get seeds to grow strawberries. It's just, it's incredible. And it's the character in this episode, it's Nick Offerman from I think that's the name from Parks and Rec, Ron Swanson. Ron Swanson, Ron Swanson plays the prepper anti-government survivalist, right? Yes. I mean, it wasn't a big leap for them to think, I wonder if he's available, but the show's incredible. But the economics of it was so clear in like the gains from trade that emerged from this. And then there's also a spot where then they're later taking medicine that they didn't have access to. So
there'll be a YouTube clip of that, or a YouTube discussion later with a Critical Commons clip.
Yep. And the funny part, YouTube allowed me to put it in. They didn't automatically flag it. I cut the clips about 90 seconds. I have about a 7.5 minute video that's going to drop that'll be out by the time our listeners hear this. So we'll put that in the description.
We'll make sure to share that over and over and over again.
Yes, clearly I'm excited. The show's amazing. I love this show.
I need to. I said I was going to start watching more TV, so maybe this is the show that'll kick me into it.
That's the New Year's commitment that we should all make, right?
More TV,
more television, a more inactive lifestyle is what I mean. But,
all right, so cheers to your very last day of dry January. So I hope you have something. Do you have anything planned for tomorrow? Are you going to?
I don't know that I'll go anywhere. Okay. I certainly have beers that have been inserted into the fridge, so they will be cold.
Okay, you have cold beers ready for you.
Cold beers.
Did you weigh yourself?
I've lost about 5 pounds. Otherwise, I don't feel any different. Which isn't, honestly, it's kind of a good result. Lost a little bit of weight, not a ton.
Yeah.
But if I felt dramatically better, I would probably have been like, "Oh no, does that mean I need to be sober all the time?" And no, I mean, I don't really drink that much for those. But it would have raised questions. I do think I've got to probably try like salad February or something in order to try to keep those 5 pounds off. So
I don't know if I told you this at the beginning. I mentioned it offhandedly, so I'm not going to call it dry January. But I cut out a lot of Coke during this during this month. I switched to Diet Coke for a lot of it, but I started drinking more water regularly. So I cut it down to like a Diet Coke or a seltzer every day rather than like an actual Coca-Cola. And then the only beer that I've had is the beer that you and I have had during our recording. So I'm not going to say that I did dry January. I don't think it's not accurate since I'm clearly drinking on each of our talks. But I will say I did, we'll treat it like a cider. I did a semi-dry January.
Have you lost weight then as well?
I have. Yeah.
Very nice.
I feel, but some of it's hard to tell whether it's cutting down the beer, cutting down the soda, drinking more water, right? Like I'm hitting lots of things. And then the semester started. So I am also walking way more. So like today, I did not teach today, but I still walked 8,000 steps. Nice. So just like walking around, like I walk to the library, I take the stairs. So as a mix of things, I've dropped between 5 and 10 pounds. I'm not good at,
wow, that's impressive.
I don't weigh myself at good enough intervals. Like, sometimes I weigh in the morning, at night and stuff like that. So it kind of fluctuates a little bit depending on how much junk I'm eating. Yeah. But the walking with the water, with the no Coca-Cola has helped.
Big. That's big. Yeah. Well, congrats. That's nice.
I figured I'd join. I said semi-join you.
Hey, that's healthy.
But this is economics happy hour, so I am drinking. And I will say, since now that we got to the end, this Star Hill Brewery Whiter Shade White IPA is actually really good. Like I've really enjoyed this.
What rating is that getting in your Untapped?
Not quite a 4. It's a little sweet, which is kind of surprising. But I'd put it up there. It's like a 3.8, 3.9. Like it's up there. It's good.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, I will. I'll update on what I'm going to do to try to offset getting beer again. I am thinking. I love salads. I love broccoli. I need to make those more in my life. I'm not ready to do a wager yet, but maybe there'll be something for March.
So listeners out there, you noticed we shout out Brian over and over for this episode. If you have topic ideas that you would like to hear Matt and I talk about, comment, email, Twitter. We are on everything, and that's probably not a good thing, but we do take suggestions and recommendations, and we would rather talk about your ideas than talk about our ideas. We've got ideas, but like we can save ours. So if there's something you want to hear, tell us. Yeah, and a big thanks to everybody who has listened, who sent us notes. Really appreciate it. And I guess we'll look forward to seeing you in another couple weeks for the next episode. See you in 2 weeks. Yeah. Well, take care, everybody. All right, bye. Cheers. Cheers. I almost forgot.